Hi, and welcome to Next Wave Network Community Lunch, where we invite a guest expert in XR, immersion, or AI to come join us and share with us what's possible. Right now, we're talking to Aaron Collegeman, who's the Chief Technology Officer for Orchestrate XR. And we've been working over the last series of community lunches that we've been able to get together on conceptualizing and building an application and allowing you all to watch us do it and to see if we can remove any mystery or fear and invite you to collaborate in the same way. Aaron, you want to talk about the project a little bit and what we're doing and where we're at?
Yeah, so the project continues to grow. I hope you guys aren't sick of me yet. I think we got a little bit more to go here. We've been through almost a complete ideation of this app that we're talking about building. The purpose of which is to take something that people are familiar with, that being tabletop role playing games, and turn it into an app that doesn't just virtualize or digitize tabletop role playing games, because those things exist, right? There's plenty of that in the world. But the aim of this application is to take that and to get people out and touch grass and to get them meeting with one another in public. And so we've gone through, like I said, we've gone through several phases of ideation. We talked loosely about what the user experience should be, who it was for. We took that, we turned that into app designs, which are over here in our mural board, emphasizing this whole like two people meet in public. Maybe they're wearing jerseys that identify them as players in the game. They bump phones to create a connection. So that requires being in person versus being able to just friend somebody that you met online. And then they go on this adventure. And the going on the adventure part is kind of what we focused on last time, because that first adventure that those two people go on, especially if one of them is a brand new player to the game, incorporates a certain amount of character creation into that first adventure. We have to help them have a character in order to be able to define what that adventure is, right? And so in our last conversation, because going on an adventure and creating a character are sort of two sides of the same coin called story, right? We spent our last conversation sort of analyzing the information architecture of story. What is a story? What are its components? What does it mean to create a character in a tabletop role-playing game, especially D&D? And we talked about our friend Warren joined the conversation and expanded on that for us in talking about facts and memories and the different parts of the brain that actually contribute to that. That was a really fascinating aspect of our last conversation. And we sort of ended with this question that was given to everybody who's on the call, which was if we're trying to generate a character for a new player, and we're trying to reduce the friction that's involved in that, like that, when you're doing an actual D&D character creation process, it could be quite involved, right? There's dice rolling involved sometimes. There's a lot of thought that goes into naming the character and the backstory of them and all this stuff. Like, how do we sort of move that along? Give these people who are familiar with role-playing games a familiar to them sort of experience that is at the same time comfortable for somebody who's rather more uninitiated. And so what we agreed was that there would be some questions that would be easy to answer and could be changed later if necessary. And then one question that sort of was a little bit maybe harder to answer, but that would provide some differentiation in the character, right? And we called that the seed question. And that's where we ended, right? And so our conversation continued after that meeting. I continued to think about the idea. That's usually what happens to me in these conversations. We spend about an hour talking about it, and then I spend several more hours just obsessed with it and wanting to expand upon it. And I reached back, JJ, into conversations that you and I have had over these last many years. And one of those conversations, several actually, those conversations have been about the I Ching.
Yep.
And I wonder if you could share for our audience a little bit about what you know about the I Ching and the ideas that you had about what the I Ching could be within the context of story generation. And while you do that, I'm going to look for something really quick on my computer. So ignore what's going on my screen for a minute and just help set everybody's minds on that concept.
So about 20 years ago, a friend of mine was telling me about the I Ching, right, which is a 3,000-year-old book, Chinese book that maps the changing from one dynasty to another dynasty. It takes 100 years, right? So the idea is that it's broken down into, I think, like 360 different somehow components. You take three coins, you roll them two or three times, and it comes back with a number, right? Um, and that number is how many, it's based on how many flips are heads and how many flips are tails in those, I think it's two columns. And then, and there are 360, and then there's actually a whole other derivation that adds another layer of story. Either way, each one of those 360 rolls is a different story element of what the one dynasty had to do to survive and ultimately 100 years later supplant the other dynasty. And one of the things is attack, full frontal attack, right? Another thing is gather your resources, right? But what's
Mhm.
really interesting is after they take these story elements, they then have poets write pieces of poetry that relate certain elements of that storyline. 321 that you rolled has seven different ideas in it, and the poetry relates to those ideas. Now, what's interesting is in the West, we see it as like an oracle or mystical, right? But in the East, they see it as more philosophical, right? That the brain gets to think through these things, and the abstract poetic answer operates like a horoscope, right? There's enough pieces for your brain to pick out what it needs, right? And so, but what I saw inside of this was a massive story structure that was connected to numbers, right? Which to me could become an algorithm that could take you to very specific story experiences. And because of the complexity of the I Ching and the fullness that it's covered. By the way, Confucius's Analects were written for the I Ching, right? So you roll the number and you get some of his poetry, and it gives you that advice and those thought processes. So, but in this experience, it feels almost infinitely open because of the significant opportunities for randomness, and because of the way they develop their story structure. You've got seven different specific elements that can be dealt with, right? This is part of the problem of going from macro world story to going to micro personal story, is how do we get from macro topic into micro topics? And inside the I Ching, there are actually a number of different ways that that can be portrayed. And I know that you had a really interesting conversation with your AI this last week where it started telling you, hey, not only that, but you can relate the bars this way, and the bars can each have a topic. And so as we look deeper, there seems to be even greater potential complexity. This to me is the kind of mathematical story system that could drive a full dive Westworld experience. So I
Mhm.
think you can tell it excites me just a little.
Yeah, and you did a good job there. I think that really captured the range of discussions we've had about it over time. And it has a certain appeal to me too. There's a little bit of a geek thing going on here for me. I don't consider myself any sort of mystic, and I have never been attracted to numerology. and I've never been attracted to astrology. Those things, they just don't they don't excite me, right? And that's me.
Yep.
But the alignment of this, and you said a little bit of this, like there is something attractive about a system that's really old that has within it the concept of randomness, that has embedded with it a rich history that does involve story, that does involve people's lives, and for all those reasons, what has happened actually, JJ, over the last 4 almost 5 years of us talking about this is the rise of large language models, right? Like they were there. People have been developing this technology for a while, but this mainstream notion of now we all have access to large language models changes how we play with ideas like this, right? So just like taking a closer look at the I Ching for a second, right? Like you were saying, there's 36 hexagrams. Each one as a hexagram is made up of 6 lines. And each one of those lines is either solid or static or broken, right? And so when you just walk through it, you could see here visually, some are all solid lines, some are all broken lines. There's one each of those, and then every combination in between, which is why there's 36 of them, right? And so each one, as you were talking, has a specific meaning within the I Ching, right? The
Yeah.
solid set of go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that the solid line is a heads and the broken line is a tails. It's as simple as that.
Yes. Yep. And I think there's also an approach, I think, to casting with the I
Thoroughly.
Ching that you're using rods or there's different methods of randomness ultimately resulting in which lines are solid and which are broken.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
binary,
Um,
right?
yeah, it is. And so then, so what's interesting, like the hexagram that's all solid lines is called the forest hexagram, and the one that has all broken lines is called the field, right? And so there is embedded within the I Ching is a relationship between the hexagrams, right? And it is a relationship that's defined by change. Okay, and so if were to take sorry, words are failing me. If we were to take the hexagram called displacement, which is represented by one broken line and 5 unbroken lines, and we were to change just 3 of those lines, okay, and say we would break the next 3 lines, so we would have broken, 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 closed, closed, right? Well, that represents another one of the I Ching, right? I think it is somewhere down here. It might be. Let's just pretend it was leading for a second, okay? So by changing just 3 lines, we go from one hexagram to another. And what's fun about this for me, and I owe a lot of this sudden epiphany to, as you said, having a conversation with ChatGPT about it. What I see in this is the potential to map onto uh, something like the hero's journey, right? Because within the hero's journey, right, we follow a character through this sort of linear set of challenges and changes and milestones leading from one place to another. Well, the simplest possible version of that is you start in one state of being and you are transforming into the next. And so if we start this character generation process by first picking one of the hexagrams randomly, and then we generate 3 more random numbers and use those random numbers to decide which 3 lines we're going to alter within that original hexagram, we get a second hexagram, and that second hexagram is where we are going. We're moving from one origin place to another. And because of the rich history that you were talking about, the poetry and the ways that the I Ching has been interpreted over time, the large language model is full of ideas that can be pulled out based on I have this hexagram and I have this hexagram, and with that, and that creates what we might call in computer science parlance a seed. Right now we have an idea that is a juxtaposition of these two other things, and I think there end up being something like 4,096 combinations, right, of these changes. So it's not a giant random number, but it
Right, but it's
is
a lot.
a randomness. And when you combine it, it on its own is not a lot, but when you combine that with the other things that we gather from the user when they create their character, the class of the character, the race of the character, the alignment of the character. When you take those things in all the different ways that those can be expressed, right? There's 9 different alignments. There's like 12 different classes. There's 10 different races. Okay, so now we're multiplying that all through the 4,096 combinations of the I Ching, and suddenly we have something that is really random and really interesting and serves to provide enough differentiation that we're not just handing out the same character sheet over and over and over again based on, oh, you're a druid and a gnome and you're chaotic. Here's your story, right? We've got something else. Okay. So, yeah, so the large language model helped me figure that out. But really, talking with you is what planted those seeds of thought. I never would have sat down and went, well, I wonder if we could figure out how the I Ching would play in here to create this sort of magic thing if you hadn't brought that idea to the forefront. So I think that my next instinct as an engineer was, well, gosh, I've got to make something, right? I've got to make a way for us to explore this together. And so what I turned to actually was ChatGPT. And I said, okay, ChatGPT, here's this algorithmic approach that I think will create interesting character stories. Will you write me some JavaScript that I can use to create a user interface for this? And here are some other constraints. And so after a little bit of back and forth, which is always seems necessary, ChatGPT and I made this thing, which is the story engine backstory generator, which hopefully is still functional. I have changed it since last Friday when I was playing with all this stuff. Now, one of the limitations here, right, is I don't have a large language model on the front end, and JavaScript and HTML are front end technologies. I don't have a server involved here. So I can't actually talk to a large language model, but I can have these inputs from the user generate the choices of hexagrams and generate the text of a prompt that I would give to a large language model to see what the story is. Okay, so that's sort of how this all comes together. So the inputs were class, barbarian, we'll just pick the top one, race, dragonborn, and alignment, lawful good. And then when you click cast the oracle, this is what you get. You get the origin hexagram, which in this case, randomly chosen was hexagram 55, abundance, and the transformation hexagram, which again, randomly chosen based on changing 3 of the lines at random,
That's
is
crazy.
innocence. So we're moving from abundance to innocence, the unexpected, which is that's very strange. I'm not sure I would be able to come up with a story like that, right? And of course, then the selections of barbarian, lawful good, and dragonborn. And here's the LLM prompt: you are a mystical oracle in a fantasy RPG world. A new player has completed character creation. They've cast I Ching and received a hexagram that represents their origin and a transformed hexagram that represents their trajectory. Use poetic mythic language to describe their backstory. Seed, the turning point that led them to the beginning of their quest. Include a brief quote or image of the origin, a brief quote or image of the transformation, a 1-sentence backstory seed that connects them, and optionally suggest how this transformation may affect their quest. Sort of makes sense. So the way you use this is you just take it and copy it and then go over to ChatGPT and post it and press enter. And the result is the poetic summaries, right? Abundance. The thunder cloud bursts and the heavens spill their bounty. Banquets, banners, and firelight blaze, yet the weight of plenty presses heavy on the soul. Transformation. Innocence. The child walks unguarded into the storm. Lightning strikes without warning, but purity of heart is the shield against chaos. And then you get the resulting seed. Born amid overflowing wealth and honored feasts, this dragon-born barbarian once knew the weight of great abundance. But at the height of glory, they were struck by the raw and unexpected call of innocence, an unplanned turn that shattered certainty and set them upon a quest for truth unattained by corruption.
The
And then
Holy
it
Grail.
extends it how this transformation may affect their quest. Their path may be marked not by hoarding strength or conquest, but by guarding the fragile flame of honesty and righteousness in a world of excess and deception. Each unexpected trial will test whether their abundance becomes pride or whether they will yield it with humility of one who remembers that the storm can strike at any moment. So then the next thing you want to do is say, okay, write a full narrative backstory. And I won't read this one, but we'll just read a couple sentences of it. So this says, the dragonborn of abundance. In the dawn of their youth, when scales gleamed like hammered bronze and their voice rolled like distant thunder, the dragonborn was raised in the kingdom where abundance reigned. The halls of their people overflowed with grain and gold, banners painted in fire reds and emeralds streamed from high spires, and the roar of feasts could be heard long after the fires died to embers. Right. And then it goes on and it defines the call of the expected and the quest ahead. I did find that for whatever reason, it kept trying to use similar names. So that is one thing that you have said, we should probably ask the people to name their character, and that just becomes another input and may have some influence over how the story is composed. But man, I got to tell you, that's cool, right?
Yes.
I mean,
That's
and so, taking this back to our conversation about story, right? So if every player in our game starts their journey this way with a rich backstory that defines who they are, again, that's one memory
yeah.
within a larger set of memories. Each user will have a memory like that. The world will have memories within it that could be injected into that prompt so that the backstories exist in a common world. That world might have what we could call seasons or chapters or whole campaigns that are being designed by a person, right? Much the way Fortnite has like seasons. Fortnite as a company and a game, they go through this process of constantly looking for ways to redefine the game and make it interesting again, right? And so make friends, break friends, right? The Walking Dead universe, Ninja Turtles, right? These are all worlds that exist in the Fortnite space. And so if you imagine it like that say every, I don't know, 3 to 6 months, there's a new chapter that turns in the world of this game. And all the new players who join during that chapter have stories that are influenced by that chapter of the world, right? And so as that progresses, a couple of iterations through that, and now there's this huge database of memories that are bouncing off of one another and interplaying in ways that we can't predict, and it gets really interesting, right? And that's before you get into the sessions where people are diving into their character and acting as their character and coming up with their own story elements as they encounter new players and new obstacles within the game, because that's how this game works, right? That's what makes tabletop gaming interesting, is the mind that the players bring to the table with them, right? And so anyway, I've had the mic now for quite some time. Why don't you give me your reaction to that? And I see Tim's joined us. Maybe Tim has some thoughts too.
Well, I just saw it, dude. I mean, you just showed me what the experience is going to be, right? And that's That's super exciting, man. I love the idea of connecting people in story physically, because so much is happening online right now. I'm just excited to actually now maybe build the doggone thing. So Timothy, Aaron and Timothy are on the call. Aaron and Tim.
Yeah, no, that's sick. If I can just use the best word, I mean that's sick, right? It's you've employed the I Ching to help break down the storyline. I really appreciate your breakdown too of your understanding of how some of those things worked and the impact. I was also really appreciate how your question is how would it affect their quest, answered with this is how it can evolve their character, right? It came back, well, is it's got a thing of integrity. Is that going to lead to pride, right, or prejudice? Like, what's it going to do? And so it's really cool because that was a connection I had made with the evolution of the character and evaluating what it's doing, but not kind of dictating, but being able to track. And so I thought that was really, really cool. Um, the last comment that you guys were making just prior to bringing up Fortnite and the generation of things, it tied in well because there are world builders out there. And I'm just wondering, can a character evolve, right? Or achieve some task or a certain level of points or experience or something like that to where everyone acting will impact the world, but maybe there's a wizard out there who can basically define the next chapter by a wave of their wand. Like they've gotten so powerful that they can do something that brings a new wave in. And so now it's not just someone external crafting the world, it's someone inside of the world having a huge impact because of their contributions thus far or accomplishments thus far, that they become one of those world masters or world builders or something like that.
So I like what I like what you're saying, in a little bit of a different way, right? I don't I you know versus the idea of John getting to wreck my world and everybody else's world based on his choice, right? I love the idea that the AI pulls the most impactful results from the season and builds the next
Right.
issues that come off of those story elements. So, but yeah, it's basically what you're saying, but the AI gets to, pull those elements out. It also goes back to the newsletter idea, that every Monday or Sunday or Friday, there's a newsletter of what happened through the week, and Blood Slayer is dead. There's now a posse going after the killers or whatever. That's one article. But I do like this idea of eras because that means one era can be all about invasion.
Mhm.
There's
Uh-huh.
everybody's dealing with this foreign country coming through, right? Or these magic users, or there's a national treasure hunt for a whatever, and the whole season is about finding these things. So I love the new way of adding a game story layer, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, or to something Tim said, and Tim, I think this is basically what you were saying. Like if there's, I think ultimately there's a question for how much of the stories that live in this system are human designed, right? And how much of them are AI designed based on randomness. And when we talk about we've talked sometimes, JJ, about how maybe when we say story engine, what we mean is master AI,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because it's a,
yeah,
it's an AI that's creating and maintaining the world,
yeah,
they're the outside reference point for the mind, for the world that exists in all the players' brains. And
yeah,
I don't, like, how many people are actually in the system with the privilege of dipping in and moving the pieces around on the board and saying, now this town is on fire, right? Like I don't know the answer to that. I think it's interesting to consider that depending upon how this thing ultimately comes to life, there might be versions of it that are open and can be run in the same way WordPress exists today, where anybody who wants to make a blog can just install WordPress and start creating content. Anybody who wants to create one of these entire ecosystems of worlds and characters and things, maybe they can get this software and they can stand it up on a server and they can run it. I like that idea, and I think that there's room within that picture for commercial organizations like Wizards of the Coast, like your own company, anybody who wants to make a serious commercial effort out of creating that world and sustaining that environment for people. And then the only question is, well, how can characters move between them? And I think the answer to that has to be yes. I think that's fundamentally what makes this really interesting for me, is that when I join Rusella Immersive's version of this system and I create a character there and I play there for months, I could still take that character, just like I could take my character sheet with me from games that JJ is dungeon mastering, and I could go down the street and I could play in the ones that Dan is doing, right? And the memories that go along are my character's memories about their experiences, and which are sort of representational of the world's memories and the session's memories and the other players, but they're not actually the memories that are stored in the world, right? Dan has a world where, everything that's up is down and everything that's down is up. And I have to go into that world with all that I've developed from playing in JJ's worlds and see what it does to me, and then I get to go back to JJ's worlds and keep playing. And I think that there's something about that that's novel and interesting for me, and it makes it different from things like Fortnite, where the only place to play Fortnite is on Fortnite, right? You can't take your Fortnite character or any of its background or its inventory or anything and leave Fortnite and go play somewhere else. It doesn't work that way. Maybe that's good. Maybe what I'm talking about is chaos and it doesn't work, but it feels like it's worth trying. I think Tim's got his hand up.
So have you guys heard of
very good.
Have you guys heard of the faraway tree, the magic faraway tree? So this is a book by, I think I can't remember her name, Garrett Blyton or something like that. It's hard to read her name. Anyways, I've been reading these to my kids, and this is what it's making me think of. So there's this story where these kids are in the world and they move out to out in the rural area, and there's a forest there, and it's called the Enchanted Forest. And they hop in, and all of a sudden, this forest is different. The trees are going whoosh, 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 and it's like they're talking. And if you put your ear to it, it'll tell you something. And then there's this big tree in the middle that goes so high up you can't see the top, and it's called the faraway tree. And all sorts of interesting creatures and people live in this tree. But the reason they go back every day is because every few days, a different world comes across the top of the tree. It could be upside down world. It could be birthday world. It could be toy world. It could be whatever. And so these kids are constantly going every day to climb this tree to poke their head and spend a few hours in a new world that will then go away and they may never see it again, or they don't know what's next. Obviously, that's not the storyline we're telling, but the relationship between having a real world that you're in and then the ability to visit other worlds whose, and there's words everywhere all the time, whose conventions only work because they're differentiating you from your world. Makes it really exciting and neat, right? That's why it works, is because, oh my gosh, water is sand here and sand is water there. But without a real world, those things are just unique, or there's nothing unique about them or interesting. So when I hear this
Right.
idea of being able to have a character that comes from a world, its initial world, then visits another world, I think keeping the character intact and not having to generate a new character to be in a new world is even more valuable because it's bringing something brand new that could influence that world in a way it wouldn't have been influenced. And it
Mm-hmm.
really livens it up. So that was my point there.
Mm-hmm. JJ, what did that do for you just now?
So, what did it do for me? I've had so many thoughts. It's really hard right now to track.
That's okay.
Um,
I,
one
I
of
can
which
I can take us for. Oh, go ahead, please go ahead.
was um, Tim's thought around. Um, oh, I'm lost, man. Go ahead. If
That's
you
okay. It'll come back to you. So we got a little big picture there for a second architecturally, and I think that to get to that point, we do have to make this first thing work, and it's a matter of balancing prototyping and large scale architectural stuff. So that's fun. We'll get back to that later. There are a couple more things that we need to sort of sort out before we can have a workable prototype of this thing. Okay. The character generation piece was a big piece. And I think we've got a version of that that feels stable. And it'll be fun to see how people respond to that. And I don't really want to change anything about it until we start to get there, which drives me back to I'm really excited because we've got designs of what the apps look like. I'm ready to sit with, an AI and start banging out some code. There's a couple
like,
things that are missing, okay? And I'll try to go through them. I don't know how in depth we can get into them right now. I'm going to start with this book, which is called One Shot Wonders. It was funny because when I really started Googling things about tabletop gaming, I messaged you about it, JJ. I was like, oh my gosh, I am being inundated with ads about stuff. It's fascinating how much stuff is out there for this audience. But this is one of the things that started showing up in my Facebook feed.
mhm.
And, you know, my understanding of what it means to have a one shot game is that it's a simple game. It's a simple story. It doesn't have any complex dependencies on previous stories. They actually compose these in a way to make them maximally compatible with different systems. They're compatible with the D&D system, but you can play them with other systems. So it is sort of like what we've been talking about just now, which is like there are stories that work in different worlds. And I don't want to take the content of any of these stories. I'm not going to read any of them on this call because I feel like there is some boundaries there around intellectual property, right? So I just want to be clear. It's not my goal to take any of these and put them into our game. But what I saw right away as I was flipping through the pages of this thing is that there's an information architecture here, and it's a very clean one. There are elements that describe the type of game and how it's going to feel. There's a sort of suggested level for the characters so that nobody dies playing a one-shot adventure. There's guidelines for how the DM should introduce it, how they should use their voice. There's secret things, there's places, there's a plot line, right? So it's all what I'm saying basically is from this I'm going to design one of the next missing pieces, which is the data model, the information architecture for stories themselves, right? Because we've got character and we've got place and we've got mechanics that we're going to borrow from D&D 5e basic rules, but we don't really have a structure yet for how the stories are going to go, and we're going to have to teach the AI how to do that, right? And so aside from being able to give the AI a prompt and get back something like this that can then be used in subsequent prompts to create the story narrative that drives the play, The other piece of this that's missing is something called a state machine. And I'm a little tickled because I prepared this for our last meeting and we never got here, which is so cool because all the things that we ended up talking about were so necessary and so important, but we never got to this. So a state machine is a way of describing a software program that has various states. Things like to illustrate by example, when you're a dungeon master, your responsibility is to take the players through sort of an organized loop of stuff, like they're exploring or they're socializing or they're traveling from one place to another or they're engaged in combat or they're resting, right? And each one of those things, exploration, socializing, traveling, downtime, combat, those are states. Okay? And you're never really in more than one of them at a time. In fact, to be in more than one of them at a time would sort of violate the whole principle of state machine. The idea is you're in this one, you're in exploring state until something happens, and now you're in the social state. Okay? And now one of the non-player characters attacks you, and now you're in the combat state, right? And so this is, to use another technical term, this is the middleware that sits between the players and the large language model. Okay? The game starts and the state machine is put in the introduce the story state. And because it's in the introduce the story state, we know that we need to compose a prompt for the large language model that goes something like, here's the story, compose an introduction and bring your players into the game. Ready, go. Okay? And the large language model will generate some narrative and we'll show that narrative to the players and we'll give them a chance to talk to each other and talk back to the AI. And there will probably be buttons that they can press that help to specify the actions. If you remember back to one of the other products that we looked at a couple conversations ago, it was sort of like this. You got a big chat prompt, and then you got buttons like you wanted to say something back. Oh, okay, well, what do you want to say? Or I want to roll some dice or whatever, like that's sort of the interface. And then those actions by the user get played back into this middleware, and the middleware goes, okay, the users did but up. And under those circumstances, that means it's time for them to travel. And the state machine moves into travel mode. And then so we generate a new prompt for the large language model and the process continues, right? And that is the closest I've come to having a solid idea of how to structure the software that sits behind the chat, right? And I'm sure that something like this lives behind every tabletop gaming AI that's ever been made. It's not really different that way. The ChatGPT is what helped me to design this. What might be interesting to some of the technical people watching this video is that this chart is made using a piece of software called Mermaid. And Mermaid is actually a syntax that lets you write text that describes a chart. And then you can generate a chart. And so what's really good at generating text? Large language models. So if you go into a large language model and you say, hey, I want to make a state machine that helps me run an AI for a dungeon master, generate a Mermaid script that describes it, it'll spit that text out and you drop it in Mermaid and you get a visual chart that people can look at. So it's super, super handy. I wish I'd had something like this in so many different phases of my career to be able to illustrate something like this. But those are really the next two things to prototype. One, again, is how to come up with a plot and elements of a plot that sit there behind the large language model waiting to be sort of pulled off. Like, oh, the users have traveled to this place. Now what? Well, look at the story. and what are we going to generate for them, right? And I'm sure there will be lots of interesting failures, loops that never end, right? That the middleware will somehow get stuck in combat or stuck in downtime, and solving those problems is the work of making this thing real and playable. But I think that's really the next step, because otherwise all we have is a fancy character generator, right? This is the piece of it that actually makes it playable. Tim, you put your hand up there.
Yeah, so love this. And the other thing it got me thinking of is into the real world aspect of it, right? One, if people are in different states, it would be nice to know that, because how do we get, so here's a question. How do we get, we'll just call it a mission, right? For time thing. How do we get a mission?
Mhm.
Is there like a job board where you go on and see what missions are available and find out what they are and decide to go on them? Is it something that is sent to an individual because of their storyline and they need to
Yeah.
assemble their team, right? And then, like you just said, they travel somewhere. So first they've got to collect their friends because they have certain skills. Like there's enough to the story, like there's an opportunity to this and that. Assemble the people you need, right? Like, oh my gosh, well, I'm gonna need that fairy because she's got magic spells. I'm gonna definitely have to get so and so just in case. Now you have to know, are they available? Who should I pick next? Then they got to go somewhere. They get somewhere. How do we know the mission started? Right. And for
Right.
me, the first thing I think of is the engagement is you take a photo with your friends to start, and that comic-fies them, turns it into the chapter, the beginning, the first shot of them about to go on their adventure. But then you have to do something, either go to a location, find an item, do something, and then again, you take a photo or whatever that adds it as part of the story of the book and a comment. Because for me, I just keep seeing this get turned into a series of comic books that you can go and flip through again, on your phone or
Sure.
wherever, relive it. But I see that just like this loop is here, each one of these things has to have some kind of way to trigger the next step, or to know that you're where you need to be and then achieve that goal before you finish the whole storyline. And so I just didn't know how that
Yeah.
extrapolated out, because it felt like these were the things.
So
But
that there's an extreme complexification in the addition of that, right? With, the difference for me in the idea that one person is connecting with another person versus me intellectually going out and blabbing a group of people, and then me setting, it's a different beginning place, of I'm consciously building, that experience. Go ahead.
Well,
Jerry?
I don't think that what you're saying and what he's saying are actually incompatible with one another. I think if we're just talking about the user experience that we have been talking about, which is two people meet, they create a connection. One of them creates a character, because we presume at least one of those people already has a character at the beginning,
Right.
but they might both have characters, and then they go on a one-shot journey together that is some
Right.
sort of short session that's generated for them according to their backgrounds, according to the world season, all that stuff. I think then there's a question called and then what. And then what, I think, is what Tim was talking about. And then the next time you play, how do you play? What is the story? Who has choices in establishing when that story starts? Where does that story live? I think those are all really interesting questions. But I'm not, unless I'm missing something, I don't think what you guys are
Well,
saying right now is really incompatible.
um, in the difference between playing a whole tabletop game with 5 person and two characters connecting with each other and having a story, right? And us all
Mm-hmm.
generating our own individual story element versus a pack group experience, um, is just a different kind of story experience for me. Um, I am one of the things that I was thinking about is, as soon as glasses come out, right? Um, then the ability to potentially record somebody speaking becomes easier, right? And we get back to, hey, this has happened. What do you do? Right. And now that person
Yeah.
gets to speak a sentence or two, and their responsibility, their evidence inside the story is more real for them, right? Um, versus
Yeah.
just a thing or the other. So, um, but
Well, well, so let me say this, right? We're talking about several things at once. One of the things we're talking about is the internal mechanism that the AI uses to manage the game itself, whatever that context is. And that could be those first two people going on an adventure together to onboard one of them. It could be a group of players who have decided that on Thursday night they're going to have an adventure in the game. And so they coordinate their behavior and they show up in the same place to play.
mhm,
And then the second set of things is some of what Tim was talking about, which is, well, what are the available stories to play? Are there pre-canned stories that you pick off of a list, or more immersively, you go to the town square and there's a list of jobs and you pick one of them? That is another way of getting it's a user interface thing. It's a user experience thing, but it's the same thing. It's pre-canned stories. You pick one. How those stories come about into existence, they can either be written by people like JJ, right? You know the world, you know the season, you know some of the non-player characters. You write the one-shot story and preload it into the system, and any group of players can play that story when they want to. Or the AI itself is sophisticated enough that it's generating a bunch of pre-canned stories, and maybe you don't even have to pick one. I would say the only prerequisite is that you have to have at least one other human being to go with you. I don't want people playing this by themselves. That thing freaks me out. I don't think we want to deepen our individual relationships with large language models. I think that can lead to uncomfortable places. And if we're really serious about getting people outside and touching grass or connecting in person, then I think the minimum has to be two people to go along together. That's the middle thing. The last thing is really bugging my brain, and it is the physical interface between the players and the game system that is in the cloud. And I think I'm glad we're talking about glasses. They're almost here. Um, it's going to be a completely new world. It's going to be buggy as all hell for quite some time. There's going to be all kinds of privacy concerns that have to be dealt with. So we'll get to that. In the meantime, I don't know how much you guys play with the voice-driven version of ChatGPT. JJ, I know you've used it in the past. In fact, I think the last time we talked about it, you said that it had lost some of the content that you were dictating to it at once, and I'm sure that was super frustrating. I don't know how much you've played with it, Tim. I really tried it for the first time the other day, and I just dictated to it stream of consciousness for 30 minutes back and forth, asking it to validate what it had heard and confirm so that I didn't lose data, and then generate a to-do list at the end. And it worked well enough where I thought, this is probably good enough. If this was the front end sort of interface for the game, that's going to dictate some things about how it's ultimately implemented. First and foremost would be that, say you've got 3 or 4 people and they get together. Well, they can't all be recording the voices. They can't all be recording their voices to contribute to the game. It's got to be one device. Otherwise, the whole thing loses coherence. You'd never be able to keep up with it. It's got to be one single point of interface. Now, if it was all text, that would be different because the text is flowing into a single channel. Everybody can be typing at once, but the machine gets to digest all of it at the same time in chunks, and that's fine. I don't think the voice part is going to work for that yet. There's a future where it does, but I don't think we're there yet. So one player basically uses their phone as the input output with the voice driven part of this. Now, everybody else could still have their phone and could see a running stream of the conversation, could have buttons that they can press that interact with the game, can see visualizations and all kinds of other things. There's that. But one person is responsible for the voice driven part. And that means a couple of things. It means, first of all, it's really cool because it works really well, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure it has its flaws, but it works really well. It dictates that the way to write this server that has our flow control and the loop and the state machine and the character generation and everything is as what they call an MCP server. And that is what allows ChatGPT to talk to it, right? So you're talking to ChatGPT and you say, hey, ChatGPT, I want to start a tribes game. And it goes, okay, welcome back, you know, Rochambeau or whatever your name is going to be in the game. How many people are you playing with today? And you say, well, I'm playing with Tim and I'm playing with JJ. And it sets up the game, right, by talking to our server and coordinating all of that. And then it becomes the point of interface. So to pick from what you were saying before, JJ, it's like the thing goes, you know, the goblin brings his sword down at JJ. JJ, what do you do? And it has to be JJ who answers. Well, I'm gonna do this, and so the machine won't know that it's you, but it's expecting you to be the one to respond, right? And that has to be enough for now. I don't know how you would do it otherwise. I'm sure there's other ways to approach that, but I think that sets us up with a basic interactivity and a way to use the latest and greatest in these tech stacks to create something that works. So I know I just rolled out a whole bunch of tech speak, and we're at the top of the hour. So you know that I don't want that to be exactly where we end, but I just want to say that like I think there is a way forward to create some of these things and get a first version of it so that we can really start to play, you know, and see where its deficits are and where its benefits are, you know. Like,
Before we
That's
break, I just want to jump in here. Guys, I've been here all along. For some reason, Discord won't activate my camera. But I've been listening to the whole conversation with much interest and enthusiasm.
Thank you, Warren. I appreciate that. It's good to see you. Welcome. And so we're at the top of the hour. Aaron, Tim, everyone, thanks for being here with us today. This is really exciting. I'm excited to see us actually bring something together and then let people, you know, print out a QR code if that's actually necessary anymore. But everyone, have a great rest of the week, and hopefully we see you next Thursday at the community lunch.